If you have read or implemented tens or hundreds of time management tips and hacks, but you still can't figure out where your time is going, then you must watch this interview. I am here talking today with one of the best-selling author on productivity and time management, a TEDx speaker, and his work has been featured in many media outlets. We're going straight into the content of the book, and the book is something that says mind management, not time management. Looks like this from David Kadavy. And David today, he's with us to talk about the book and the content of it. Let me tell you, if you have not heard about this book, you must go and get a copy of it because the kind of tips and tricks you get in here, you won't get anywhere. I mean, especially, I've read a lot of productivity books, but I haven't found something similar elsewhere. So I'm really excited to have you, David, on the show. David, welcome to the show.
Ajay, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you. So first of all, let's start with your inspiration. What inspired to write so much about mind and time management and productivity? Or
Yeah,
in a
so
book, you're a serial book author, you've written many books, right? So tell us about
sure.
that as well. Yeah.
Well, and that's actually where this all started was writing my first book. I'm not somebody who grew up wanting to be a writer. I actually didn't like writing very much growing up. But then I became a designer, and then I ended up getting a book deal to write about design. And I thought, well, how hard can this be? I've been very many times in that sort of painful creative process where you feel like in the beginning, like it's not going to work out, and then somehow it all does happen to gel. I've been through that before, so I figured, oh, a book, I can handle that. And I signed this publishing contract, had to write a book in 6 months, and I cleared away everything to take on this opportunity. I fired my clients. I shut out my social life. I just basically locked myself in my apartment for a Chicago winter and said, okay, now it's time to write this book. Well, it didn't turn out to actually be that straightforward. I ended up having plenty of time to do the writing, but what I found was while I was spending a lot of time attempting to write, I was getting very little writing done, and I wasn't actually spending very much time actually writing because most of that time just seemed to be banging my head against the wall. And then I would do that 12 hours a day, but maybe 15 minutes of each day, I might hit this sense of sort of flow where all of a sudden all the prose is coming to me very easily. And within 15 minutes, I'm writing pretty much an entire chapter draft uh, in that one little sitting. So I came out of that experience or throughout that experience was asking myself, well, why is that? Why is it suddenly easy to come up with this creative output when I'm spending so much time just agonizing over trying to get to that point? So that's when I started to look at what was known about the science of creativity and the neuroscience of creativity and other behavioral science things. And I started to look for certain patterns. And throughout the experience of writing that book, and then in the years after that, started to devise a way of formalizing how to arrive at those creative insights on command. Because it turns out that it doesn't actually take that much time to have a great idea. You know, you can have those aha moments, and they can be incredibly valuable. But it's not very easy to make that happen. So it's clearly not a question of time. And I think the paradigm that we've been working on for so long has been of time management.
Yeah.
The basic offering of time management is that if you have a certain amount of time that you apply towards doing a thing, you're going to get a certain amount of output. And this is based on uh, basically originated with scientific management, which was an industrial way of managing people
You're defining
was
productivity.
yeah, defining productivity of saying here's the task that we need to get done, and here are the actions that you can take exactly, and this is how long it should take you to uh, perform those actions. And if we have a certain number of people performing these actions with a certain amount of time, we're going to get a certain amount of output.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't really work with, I would say, even beyond knowledge work. I feel like we're more in like a creative age. Uh, when it comes to creativity, then it's there's really very little there's very little connection between how much time you're putting towards something and the value of your output. You know, you could write a novel that sells 0 copies, or you could write a novel that sells 1 million copies. They could might take the same amount of time to write. How long
Yeah.
does it take to type a novel? You could type a novel in a day. Is it going to be worth reading? Probably not. It's going to take time, or it will take uh, like to arrive at those solutions. The interesting story that needs to be in the novel takes not just time sitting there and typing, but incubation, time away from the problem. And so it's not so much a matter of putting in a certain amount of time performing an action to get an output. And so that's where all this started for me.
So it's the other way around. Generally, people get very good at a particular area and then they write a book. Looks like for you, writing a book gave you an idea of writing another book about time management, which is cool.
Yeah, I'm a very I've come to accept that I'm a very bottom up process person, a very inductive person. I really like to, well, I guess with Design for Hackers, or my first book, I was an expert on design. I was trained as a designer. I was an award-winning designer. I knew a lot about it. Putting it into words was a new skill for me, but when it came to something like mind management, not time management, it was really the act of writing the book itself in a way was it's a discovery process for me. I've come to terms with the idea that when I write a book, I'm generally, not always, but a lot of the times, trying to learn something myself in the process of writing the book.
Okay, right. So let's get into the book now. In
Yeah.
the start of the book, you've really broken two big myths, and I really kind of resonated with them. And one is everyone has got 24 hours in a day. And you would hear this statement given by so many people, so many motivational speakers and everything, right? You all got 24 hours, right? But it's far from true in the way how you use it. And it is a myth. So let you explain it. Why is it a myth and why should it be broken?
Well, yeah, myth. I'm not sure if it's a misconception, I think,
Hmm.
or it's a false assumption, I
False
think
assumption, yeah.
is what I would say, is that false assumption being, well, you have 24 hours in a day, and so therefore you must manage those 24 hours. Great. That's the sort of conclusion that seems to be suggested when people point out that there's only 24 hours in a day. Well, you better use that time very effectively. And that's true to some extent. I mean, I think it's a foundational concept to manage your time well, but eventually you reach this point where you've only got 24 hours. You can only do so many things, and so you might as well. And as we've talked about, uh, not all ideas are of equal value. I mean, you could do something that takes very little time, and it can be an idea that has a lot of value, or you can spend a lot of time on something that's an idea that's quite worthless. And so eventually, you know, time management becomes like squeezing blood from a stone. If you are trying to grow uh, through just using your time more efficiently, you're going to reach a point where you have gone beyond the point of diminishing returns. You've gone to the point of what is it, declining returns, where basically you're getting so wound up. You're so desperate to find these little tiny bits of time. You're trying to shave off seconds here and there, that you're actually going to make yourself in kind of an anxious state. And that's actually uh, at odds with being creative. To be creative, you need to be in a good mood. You want to be in a relaxed mood. And that's where you start having those valuable ideas. And so basically, time management is like squeezing blood from a stone. And that's the conclusion that I draw from the fact that there are only 24 hours in a day. There's a limit to how much you can manage your time, is what that means.
Yeah, that makes sense. But the second assumption that you put together that is about being productive is about how much you're producing, and you say that it's a false assumption. Why is it a false assumption when we say that if you're producing the maximum output in the minimum possible time, that means you're productive, right?
Yeah, well, this goes right back to what we were talking about of with ideas having different levels of value. You can be productive as you're if you define productivity as output, you're sitting there and typing. Uh, it's not you're not necessarily going to produce something of value out of that. And so that's where this whole time management paradigm breaks down, because time management seems to assume that you follow these steps, do this task within this amount of time, and you're going to come up with something that's valuable. Well, that's not necessarily going to be the case, especially in this age that we have. that we're staring down of AI, of automation, of if the steps are known to do this particular thing, well, they're going to be automated. AI will increasingly be able to do more of these things. And so, what does that mean for us? It means that we need to tap into what it is that makes us human, and that tends to be our what we create. Those are the things that are the furthest out of reach of AI, or the intellectual things that are furthest out of reach. Not going to be a lot of AI masseuses anytime really soon, anyway.
Talking about AI, there is a lot in terms of writing and copywriting that AI tools can do, right? GPT, everybody is talking about it.
Yeah, and I've sat and played with it, and I find it personally valuable for asking questions to try to untangle my understanding of something that's complex. Like I've been learning a lot about, you know, 15th and 16th century Italian politics, and what did the Medici do here, and what did the Sforza do here, and so ChatGPT can be useful for, I think, figuring those things out. But I have tried, and I can't get an original insight out of that. But which makes sense because it's actually at odds with the way something like that works. It's designed to actually come up with the least original but correct thing that you possibly can come up with, and so that's where there's still that area that or one of a few areas I think where humans are still relevant.
I had a interesting chat with ChatGPT this morning after I finished reading your book. I asked ChatGPT, "Do you know David Kadavy?" And he said, "Yes, I do. He's written these books." They were talking about the design books, and then I said, "No, no, no. The one who has written the book Time Management, not sorry, Mind Management, not Time Management." And ChatGPT said, "Oh, yes, I know. He's written a book about productivity, time management, not mind management or time management." And then I said, "Okay, can you summarize that book?" So it started summarizing it. "Oh, yes, I can do it." And then it kind of wrote two paragraphs. And I was like, "Did I read a different book than what he
And
summarized?"
then it was
Because
wrong. It
he
just made
just took
something up.
something, he just took something, some concepts like 80-20 rules, Pareto principle. And he said, "Oh, then the David goes into the detail of Pareto principle." I was like, "What?" That's not
Yeah,
good. Right. And then I
it
said,
just
and I told stop it. I stopped generation, and I said, "Okay, no, this is not correct. This is not what he talks about. He talks about some mental models, and he talks about some, 4 stages of creativity and all." So I gave these ideas, and he said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, you're right." So he talks about the mental model, and he picks up some mental model from God knows where. So
yeah.
and I told ChatGPT, "You don't know about this book, so please shut up." And then the AI robo apologized.
Chat GPT is a great BSer, and going along with that, I asked it, well, because I'm wondering, well, how at first I'm wondering how relevant am I as a writer, so I like asked it to write something in the style of me, and it kind of came up with something that what seemed insulting to me as a style, and I was like, well, okay, how about Ryan Holiday? And like again, it was like the same style. It was like, well, how about Mark Manson or James Clear? And it was always came up with this thing. It was like nothing like any of those writers, but it was clearly less. It was clearly a little more casual,
Okay.
but not the same.
It is useful though, because I asked ChatGPT 10 days back, "Can you give me some names of the people who have written about productivity and they're still active?" And it gave
Yeah.
me your name. So that's how I came to know about you.
Oh wow. Well, that's flattering. Thank you, Chat GPT.
He gave me 10 names, and I was like, kept asking him. Although I said that give me the names of the people who are active, and it gave me the names of people who died. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're right. Or maybe they're somewhere in the there. Maybe they're an AI somewhere.
It's getting better. I think in future it'll be good enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump back onto the book. And I think in the first few chapters, you've also mentioned about the importance of your first hour rule. So that you said that there's first hour rule. Do your important things in first hour. Tell us a little bit more about. Is it like you're talking about going into very actionable steps? First hour is like when you wake up, you want to do something, or when you start your workday. What exactly? How
Yeah.
do you define first hour?
Well, one of the basic things I'm trying to do with managing mind instead of time is you're finding times, uh, which is I think of it as something building upon time management as a foundation. So there's one of these false assumptions is that all hours of our day are equal. Well, we generally are not going to schedule a meeting at say 3 a.m. unless we
Mm.
really, really have to, and it's a really important meeting, and there's no other choice. Uh, but we tend to look at our calendar, and if there's empty space and somebody proposes a meeting, we say, okay, sure. Uh, but our energy fluctuates. We have different types of energy during different times of day and different parts of the week. Um, and also, the choices that we make have ripple effects throughout whatever unit of time that we're in. I find that a day is one of those units of time that however we choose to spend our morning is going to affect in some way the way that we spend the rest of our day.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, a lot of us sleep with our phones next to us. And while we're still in bed, we'll pick it up and start looking through social media, checking emails, just inviting this barrage of things to affect our mental state and to change the direction of our day. So what I propose with the first hour rule is that you don't do any of that stuff, and instead you just start the first hour of your day doing something very important. For me, it's writing. I write with the first hour. Well, I'm currently meditating with the first hour of each day during a short challenge, but then after that, I write. And I think of it a little bit like, well, I used to live in Chicago, and the O'Hare Airport is notorious for being a place with delays and cancellations, especially during the winter. And life is a little bit like an airport when you think about it, in that uh, airports have more and more delays and cancellations as the day goes on because they start, the during the night there's not really a lot of flights going on, and then in the morning they're starting with a fresh slate, a clean slate, and then this crew member shows up late, or these crew members have worked so many hours now that they can't they're not allowed to work any more hours, or this plane breaks down and they use this other plane for this flight, and everything starts to break down, and then so next thing you know, you're sleeping on the floor and eating McDonald's, uh, and your flight is canceled. So if you start off your day right, you're not going to be able to prevent all these different sort of things that happen in your life throughout the day, because certainly we start our days with the best of intentions and things kind of fall off track. And so that's why I say start with the first hour. And sometimes that discipline that you carve in your mind with using that first hour to do something very important starts to have halo effects throughout the rest of your day, where if you're able to actually not pick up your phone first thing in the morning and spend that first hour, say, writing, well, then maybe later on in the day, you look at your phone and you're about to pick it up and you think, not going to do it. And suddenly it's easier to do it because you've carved those pathways. So a lot of different benefits from just a simple rule of taking the first hour of your day to work on whatever is the most important.
I think it works. And when you do not pick up your phone first thing in the morning and start doing something like meditation or writing or anything that's important, you get into the flow state and you really forget that you have to pick up the phone in the second hour also, right? It does happen. You just get that because if you don't let that trigger happen, because once you have picked the phone up, then you will be like endless scrolling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you kind of, I totally agree. If you take something different, which kind of is so involved, keeps you involved, then you will probably have less social media addiction. I'm trying a lot of things about, how to reduce my usage of social media, although I only use it for good purposes, but still.
Well, there's this famous neuroscience saying, neurons that
Wired
fire
together.
together.
Hmm.
So essentially, every time you perform an action, it becomes easier to perform that action
Yeah.
in the future. And so resisting something is an action. So if you are spending the first hour resisting, say, picking up your phone,
Hmm.
well, then you're carving that neural pathway to resist picking up their phone. Now, I think there are certain rebound effects where sometimes, there's all, we're very complex. We can say, well, I spent the first hour doing this, so now I can treat myself, like that can happen too. But overall, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay, right. So let's move on to the another part of your book where you talk about different stages of creativity. And some you might have heard that, oh, this person is very creative, this person is not so much, right? And then in your book, you talk about, okay, there are different stages of being creative. One cannot be creative at this throughout the day or throughout the week, throughout the months, correct? So tell
Well,
us a little bit. Okay, is that not true?
Well, there's the four stages of creativity, and there's this idea of yeah, you know, fluctuations
Hmm.
in creative energy as well. So four stages, we can talk about the four stages of creativity. I think that the ones that get us uh, stuck are actually the last two stages of creativity. The last two stages of creativity are illumination and verification.
Hmm.
So when we are trying to be creative, we often get stuck on illumination. We want an aha moment. We're trying to force it. We're trying to make it happen. And then verification, which is the details. We get stuck on the details. Well, if I try this, is it going to work? Uh, but to get to those last two stages, to make those work, you need those first two, and they're preparation and incubation. So we got preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. Now, preparation is just turning the problem over in your head, knowing it from all sides. Uh, and so, for example, if you are writing a marketing plan, there's so many different things you need to consider. You need to consider your product roadmap. You need to consider what's going on in the landscape of the industry. You need to consider what are the different channels that are working. And it's really silly that we try to make that illumination happen with such a complex amount of information, uh, in the beginning. So we have to absorb that information. Then there needs to be this stage of incubation, time away from the problem. Now, that can be a short amount of time or it can be a long amount of time. I find that it happens to be, it correlates with how complex is this problem? How much experience do I have in this domain? How necessary is it that this be a really innovative solution or that this is just a complex problem that I'm trying to solve? So it could be that you go take a walk. It could be that you take a nap. It could be that you need to go on vacation or step away from it for weeks or months or years. Mark Twain wrote Huck Finn. I think it was three different times he was working on it over the course of 9 years. He eventually found that basically I need to just step away from something. I need to stop trying to force this book from happening and step away from it for a while, work on something else, and then it just sort of comes. But it all depends upon how big of a thing you're trying to create. So those are the four stages of creativity: preparation, incubation, illumination, verification.
On the point of incubation, how much of time away you need. How do you figure that out?
I think you need to experiment with it. You need to become an expert on your own creative process and try it with a lot of different things. It can be a simple thing. I do it for trip planning. I have my sort of weekly review. And if I'm thinking, oh, maybe I want to go spend a month in Italy. Well, I'm not going to sit down and plan that all at once. I'm going to sit and take some notes and say, well, here's different ways that might work. Maybe I'm going to stay in Rome and make trips to these various places. Maybe I'm going to stay in Florence for a week and stay in Rome for a week and stay in Naples for a week. Maybe I'm going to stay on the outskirts of some of these places. I can't decide all that at once. It's too complicated. Um, and so for myself, I will sit and brainstorm that stuff, do it once a week. And over the course of several weeks, I realize, oh, when I go back to planning it, I'm like, oh, I know exactly what I want to do here. And then one by one, those decisions start to become solved. Now, if it's something like I'm writing one of my Love Mondays newsletters. I have a weekly newsletter, comes out every Monday. I've done 200 in a row at this point without missing a single one. And there's like a 200, 300 word essay that goes in each one. And then there's cool things and quotes and books and stuff. And so it's a little bit less complex than planning a month-long trip to Italy. And I've got a lot of experience because I've done it 200 times. So what I do is I just have on my task management system, according to the schedule, it's put in there on, I don't know if it's the first Wednesday of each month or something like that, that I will barf draft, uh, my 4 upcoming newsletter ideas. And I can just sit there and sometimes they come easily, sometimes they don't, but I just need to keep my fingers moving and write and get something out there. And that's a way of preparation. And then I don't have the next task until a week later. So there's all that incubation that's taking place. And almost without fail, I
Mm.
sit down, look at what I've written, and I rewrite everything. And it's just so much clearer because I've taken that time away from the problem. The thing that you need to, probably the most important thing of using incubation to your advantage, and it can be used to your advantage, is letting go of the desire of trying to come up with a solution right now. Trusting that if you just absorb some information or make some attempts at solving this problem quickly before you get burned out, stepping away from it, that when you come back, it will be that much more clear and crisp. Then you become better and better at using incubation. So this is an ongoing process. It's something that you need to practice uh, to build that trust of understanding that if I don't come up with a solution right now, that it will come to me if I just make some attempts now and give myself some space and then return to it.
On January the 1st this year, I just thought to myself, you know what, let's start creating some short videos, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've so far I only did one short video on my channel. Other than that, I had like 60, 70 interviews. And I just thought, okay, let's create one. But then I thought, okay, let's do for the whole month. Let's see how much I can do. And I just promised myself, let's do one every day in the month of
Mm-hmm.
January. I didn't have 30 ideas. Right? I was like, how will I do it? So on day one, I recorded 3 or 4 videos, and then my gray cells have stopped working. I can't do anymore, right? And I recorded them. So those covered first, second, and third of the January. And then I created a few more like this. And every time I sit and create the short ideas, I think that I will do 5 or 6 this time, but my fuel runs out after
Mm-hmm.
third idea, right? I only could write like 3 speeches. It's only very short speeches, right? 1 minute videos. But with that incubation, like every time I think I can't do anymore, take a break, take a rest. What is the next idea? I don't know. This way, I have been able to do one shot every single day for this year so far,
Oh, that's very cool. So you were writing the script, recording, editing, and publishing all in one session?
all in one session. So what I'm doing now is I record like an Instagram. They give a very kind of 4K recording features. So I use Instagram to record, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
record like 3, 4 in Instagram at once, which will take around 5 to 6 minutes if my script is sort of ready, idea is ready. And then I save it as draft and then download the video from there and upload it in YouTube Short and TikTok Shorts. It's like I'm doing in all 3 platforms. Okay, let's do it. And it's just working out so smoothly, only because
Mm-hmm.
I mean I just now came to know that incubation is going to be the topic for today's short, which I will
Ah,
record shortly after this interview.
oh,
Right.
great. Yeah, I've been obsessed with, or I've been trying the short form video thing as well.
Hmm.
And, you know, this is this sort of process that I typically go through in any sort of new thing. I did it with my newsletter, which, like as I've said, I've done 200, so that's basically 4 years every week. Uh, and it is this hands on, I'm doing the whole process all each time in the beginning. And then I start dividing up that process into various components. So it's like just the script writing, or it's just the shooting, or it's just the editing, or it's just the publishing. Um, and I find that that helps me use my mental energy. So with the newsletter, I've got that where I have my drafts, which are based upon tweets that have done well. Typically, I've got them in an Airtable database, and then I do my polish part where I edit them and get them sort of ready. And then I've got the whole system for choosing things, and those are all like different pieces. And I find that I don't get burned out quite so quickly because I have the system in place. But I think that a lot of us, what we do is we think, well, I'm going to batch um, my reels, for example. So that means I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do 30 reels. And if you've never done any, then you don't know what processes to follow, right? So now you've done a bunch of them. So if you were to systematize it, which is something that I'm working on now, where I will write and then I will have a shooting day where I'll shoot several of them. And then I'll have like a certain amount of editing. And then there's putting in B roll. And then there's a publishing schedule. You only learn that because you've gone through the process hands on, kind of doing things that don't scale. And then through repetition, you start to create these things that do scale, that do make better use of your energy. And then suddenly you have all this extra energy that you have this surplus that you didn't have before. For me, it started with the podcast. I'm getting close to my 300th podcast episode. And once I got a system going for that, then I started doing the newsletter. Now I've got 200 newsletters, and now I'm building systems for doing short form video reels. And where did all that extra energy come from? I wasn't able to do all those things at the same time several years ago when I started the podcast. Just doing the podcast was hard, right? So this is the magic of using your creative energy as a resource and figuring out how best to use it, because you're able to create more and more just through allocating that energy really well.
Yeah, and also channelizing that energy and finding out right tools, because you're able to do that much now because you have system in place, and people fail, systems don't.
Yeah. And the systems, it's something that I resisted early on because I thought, well, I want to be creative, I want to be inspired when I create something. But you realize that if you set up the systems and make the restrictions, then you're able to do more and more, and the inspiration comes, and you're able to create more and more cool things that way. I think of it a little bit like, when you're creating a system, it's almost like the difference between flying private and flying commercial. I've never flown private, for the record, but I've flown commercial many times. I would like to fly private, but like that's kind of what we uh, focus on in the beginning is the flying private. Okay, I'm gonna sit and create this one thing. I'm gonna sit down and write this one novel. And it's, well, you can't afford it, right? So you can't afford to fly private. You can't afford to sit down and write this one novel. But if you fly commercial, which means you have to make some compromises, basically. Well, you have to go on this schedule, and you're not going to be able to go from this city directly to that other city. You've got to go through this other city before. You got to make some compromises, but now you're at least able to do it, right? So that's what having a system is like, is you figure out what compromises you can make to get what it is that you want, and suddenly you have more resources left over.
Okay, great. Okay, now let's move on to another big part of your book, which is about the seven mental states of creativity. Prioritize, explore, research, generate, polish, administer, and recharge. And I want to know, how do you connect that with the four stages of creativity that we've just spoken, and how to use this concept of mental states, really?
Yeah. Well, this is a lot to chew. The mental states alone, especially in audio, are
Mm.
quite a bit to chew on. But suffice to say that I found that a lot of things that I thought were one task were really multiple tasks, because as I paid attention to my creative energy, I started to recognize these certain patterns. Like if I'm sitting down and writing, there's actually a few different ways that I might be writing. I might be writing in a way where I'm trying to produce something that's a finished product, such as like if I'm writing a newsletter, or I might be doing exploratory writing, which is where you find the cool things, where I'm simply writing what's on my mind or a thought that I'm having, and I don't really know how I'm going to use it. So that would be generate and explore, a couple different of the mental states, and then there can be where I'm sitting down and I'm trying to edit this and get it ready to ship. And that's a polish mental state. And those are just like a few of the uh, sort of creative mental states. Now, how do those match up with uh, the four stages of creativity? Well, I think of it almost like bike gears. You know how when you change gears in a bike, there's the front gear and the back gear, and the chain moves from one gear to the next. And so it's for every couple revolutions of this one gear, this other gear is rotating only once or only half. And so they don't necessarily all match up perfectly. So you've got your projects that you're trying to move forward, but you are going through these mental states pretty much naturally. I call them creative cycles. For myself, my energy fluctuates throughout the week, such that in the beginning of the week, I really am focused on doing that generate work, where I'm trying to create something that's useful, and am able to be in that mental state. Uh, I'm in that mental state because I've sort of recharged over the weekend. Recharge being one of the other mental states. But while recharging, I've incubated, which is one of the four stages of creativity. I've incubated things that I was working on last week. And so, especially Monday and Tuesday, I'm like, no meetings, I'm just going to sit and write. Mondays, I try to not even touch a device. I type on my typewriter, which people watching can see behind me. And then, but by Wednesday, like I'm starting to get tapped out of energy, and a lot of the problems that I've tried to solve, because I'm usually like working on a book. Uh, a lot of problems I've started to solve. I've gotten some of it to weave together. It's almost like I'm weaving a tapestry, but now I've got a bunch of loose ends, and I can't quite figure out how to get them to connect. But my energy is a little bit tapped out on the week. So then I'll start exploring. Well, maybe I'll read a little bit about Leonardo da Vinci, or maybe I'll read a little bit about Raphael. And that is what some people might think of as research, but another mental state that I talk about, which I call research, that's when you have actual questions specifically that you were trying to answer. And so I might be doing that a little bit later in the week. Now, we're on Wednesday right now, we're speaking. So Wednesday is a good time for me to maybe do a podcast episode where I'm talking extemporaneously about some of my ideas. And so that might help me work out some of my ideas. And that's a bit of an explorer state. Now, by the time I get to Friday, I'm tapped out on energy. I know I can't tie all these loose ends together. I've done a bunch of preparation on some problems. I know some incubation is coming up with the weekend, and that's the time where I typically allow myself to be in the administrate mental state, which is that I'm maybe reviewing my finances, working on one of my income reports that I publish on my blog, kind of getting those nuts and bolts, those things that keep the lights on and allow me to do this creative work. Also, I can recharge over the weekend while allowing the sort of loose ends to incubate over that weekend, knowing that I can arrive into my office on Monday morning and suddenly I'll have newfound clarity on the things I was struggling with last week. So that's just a use case of how uh, those stages and mental states can match up.
I was so glad when I read these things in the book because that's somehow I do work. So I do write speeches for my public speaking. And
Oh,
when I
it's
do
hard.
write them, I'm like, I will, if I have to give a speech on, let's say, Friday, I will start thinking about it as soon as I know that I have to give a speech, right? Let's say
Yeah,
15 days ago. So I start thinking about it, but I wouldn't write a single word. I'll think on 15 days ago, then 14 days ago, then 13 days ago, something came up in my mind. I just wrote two, three lines, right? And then I'll be like, again, incubating. And then some ideas will come up. So there would be a mental script ready by then, right? So it's just a matter of putting it. And all this while, I was actually going through these mental states,
mm-hmm.
like I was exploring, I was doing research. So everything that I was reading in that duration, I was trying to link that how I can use this information, for example. So I think that's a kind of research and explore mental state that you mentioned. Yeah.
Yes, I find it really useful to be aware of these mental states
Yeah,
because
exactly.
that's that helps me recognize I can feel it in my brain.
Hmm.
I I have I think that the same way that the first time you pick up a guitar and you try to put your fingers on the strings the way you're supposed to form a chord and you think this is impossible, but then eventually you're able to do it
Yeah.
and play entire songs. I think that our brains can be the same way, but you need that framework, just like you need the chords, you need the frets on the guitar. If there are no frets on the guitar, well, I guess it'd be like a violin, right? It's really hard. You've got to figure out how to get the exact hit the note exactly right. Otherwise, it's going to be flat or it's going to be sharp. Um, so having the mental states, I find, gives me a nice lattice work with which to make decisions about how I'm using my energy. And it helps me recognize when I do sit down and write, where I sort of reach this point where I'm like, okay, I can feel it in my brain that I've got these loose ends that I can't tie together. I've run out of generate energy right now. Now it's time for me to jump to explore. And that's where I like, for myself, I'll type a bracket, or if I'm on my typewriter that doesn't have brackets, I'll type a parentheses. And now I will write anything. I might be writing on a meta level where I'm saying, well, this is the part of the book where I need to explain this and that, and this is the information that I want to withhold so that people are interested in reading further and that they can better absorb this other thing, right? So I'm writing on a different level. This isn't I'm not generating something that's going to end up in the book. I've recognized, because I'm aware of those mental states, that I'm out of that type of energy, and I can feel that as this well has run dry, this other well has started to. What does a well do when it gets when it gets filled with water? Well, there's one. Well, this one well has emptied, this other has filled.
Great. Okay. So, by the way, if people who are watching us and thinking about what keyboard David is talking about after reading the book, I actually Googled it. It's something called Neo 2. Is it correct, David? It's got a full keyboard with a calculator kind
Oh
of screen.
yeah,
Correct?
yeah. The my word processor behind me on my bookshelf. So I am a big fan of well, I talk about in the book, grippy versus slippy tools. Uh, how how specialized is this tool to the thing that you're trying to do? And
Hmm.
that specialization seems to correlate inversely with the amount of distraction that that this thing exposes to you, the slipperiness of it. So I do not a lot of writing on my laptop because that's a very slippy tool. There's so much I can do
Hmm.
on a laptop, right? I can go to social media, I can do some web research. Yeah, I can type fast on it, but I can also type pretty well on my typewriter. And the way that the process works, as Hemingway said, the first draft of everything is and that is what my typewriter's for, is first drafts. And I don't need to like transpose it electronically. At the same time, I also have the Neo, which is a portable word processor. It used to be used in schools to teach typing, and there's this sort of secondary market. They've discontinued. They're available on Amazon for about $50 or something, but they're fantastic for writing. It's just you can see a few lines of your writing and you can capture it. And yes, if you come up with something incredibly brilliant that you want to put on your computer, you can, like a caveman, just connect it via USB cable and watch it type it into a document.
Yeah, good to know that these kind of tools are still in use and they are being used for such a great purpose. So, thanks for introducing me to this keyboard thing. I
It's
had
awesome.
this question on the mental state that we just spoke about, David, and now that we know about those mental states, sometimes it happens that you're kind of stuck in one state, and most likely that's going to be research or exploration, right? So you're kind of doing research, research, research. You just can't go to the next stage wherein you have to kind of just do it, right? You've prepared enough now, move on. How do you transition smoothly from one stage to another? That's my question.
I have it down to where I know my rhythms pretty well and I know that process pretty well. So if I'm getting stuck where I'm researching and I'm researching and researching and I actually have enough energy that I'm able to keep researching, uh, that will typically be a sign for me that I need to try to do a little bit of generate to kind of find out what I don't know. When it comes to writing, I feel like one of the jobs of a first draft is to teach you what you don't know. Um, but to go to the question of switching mental states, uh, I'm not sure if this is what you're getting at, but there is the issue that sometimes it's not that negotiable. Sometimes you need to do a certain type of work and you're not quite in that state at this
Mm,
particular moment. And it really helps if that's something that happens regularly. Um, and that's something where you can sort of set up different cues that allow you to get in that mental state. There's a great story um, in Josh Waitzkin's book, which is The Art of Learning, where he talks about coaching an executive who was very distracted in the meetings that he was going to. So Josh asked him, "When do you feel in the mental state that you would like to be in those meetings?" Like, well, I feel the most in flow when I'm playing catch with my son. So basically, he set up a series of cues where he would play catch with his son, listen to a certain song, do a series of stretches, have a snack, and then he would be in that mental state and he would go to his meeting. Slowly, over repetition, over time, he was able to take out certain elements of that routine to where he could just think about the song, and that would put him in the mental state to be ready for the meeting. So I think practicing all the time, just like practicing guitar, uh, can help you have a mind that's more nimble, where you can just think about the mental state that you want to be in, and then get into that mental state. It takes time. It takes practice.
yeah, so I think practice will help you create that trigger permanent, and then you can kind of use just thought of it. And also, I think the deadline, setting some deadlines onto you. If let's say you have to produce something and you're stuck in research, then you say, okay, I'm not doing any research after 2 days or
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
and personally, me as an inductive person who is always working bottom up, this is why I am always shipping all these small things. I'm working on tweets, and then the tweets become newsletters, and then the newsletters become podcast episodes, and then all that kind of gets stitched up eventually into a book. I like the stand-up comedy model of creating things where stand-up comics, they think of an idea, maybe they talk about it with their friends, and then they go to an open mic and they try to see, is this getting a laugh? Is it not? Are people looking confused? Do I need to be more clear here? And then they've got it. Then they build up into 5 minutes, and maybe they do a 20-minute set, and then eventually they've got their hour-long special that they ship, and then they start over again. So I think it can be helpful also if you can find some way to not even break down the project, but just say, well, what if I just take this little bit of research and create something tiny with this? And that's what's great about doing things like creating reels, like I'm doing on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube Shorts and stuff like that. Is it's always you've got these little units that you can work on and ship and practice your shipping skills, and they can all build up into something. And it's not like bricks, it's not like puzzle pieces that all fit together necessarily. Like they weave together, and some of those pieces fall to the wayside and don't belong. But I think that that's really helpful too if you can find tiny things uh, to ship.
Okay, right. So there is one more paragraph which I can recall that you've written in the book, which is about quit your daily routine and start your weekly routine, right? And I just, when I looked at it, I just thought, yeah, a lot of people do plan how the day is going to look like, but not so much for the whole week, right? This is what I'm going to achieve in this week. I'm not talking about the work projects. Yeah, there you do it, but in your personal life. So give us some more because I personally think that if we start planning your weeks and months, then you will see substantial difference in your life where you were last year to this year, because most people, the life is the same as it was last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us more about that chapter that you've written in the book.
Yeah, and this ties into the idea of creative cycles, which is that there are these cycles that you notice, patterns that you notice in your the way that each day is a little bit the same as the next day, each week is a little bit the same as the next week, each month, quarter, year, and you see patterns where you notice that oh, during this time of year, I really am thinking about my finances a lot, or during this time of the day, I am most creative. And a great unit to work with is the week. I am a big advocate of what David Allen talked about in Getting Things Done, the weekly review. For me, it's on a Sunday, and that's where I sit down and make a list of kind of the projects that I'm working on, the projects maybe that I'm going to defer that are on my mind. They're going to put into someday maybes. And I look at my schedule for the week, and I actually look at my calendar and type out everything that's on the calendar in a bullet point list of my days. And I find that through doing that, I realize there's a lot of different things that I might not have noticed or thought about
Mm.
um, if I had just gone by my calendar. So, for example, preparing for this week and knowing that I had this conversation with you, I knew that I want to have my battery charged for my camera and my lighting setup, and so that's going to need to happen at a certain time or date. And so you find a place that fits uh, what your natural fluctuations in energy are for you to do that thing, so you're not just like running around like a chicken with your head cut off. And so it allows you to it puts you in that prioritized mental state, which is the mental state that uses your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for long-term planning and urge suppression, and it's actually the most energy hungry part of your brain. It's not a big part of your brain, but it's very energy hungry. So for us to prioritize and to decide what's important, what needs to get done, what doesn't need to get done, it takes a lot of energy. So it makes sense to prioritizing by planning things in that way. And when you have predictable cycles in a unit of time, such as a week or a month, uh, that really helps when you come across something that you suddenly remember to do because you realize that now isn't the time to do that thing. So when you have those cycles really planned out, you sort of create this sense of urgency then, where not only can you focus on the thing that you're doing right now because you know that now is the time to do this thing. Any distraction that comes your way, you can say, oh, there's this other time for doing that thing. Just as an example, I was talking to Ari Meisel, who's a great productivity consultant as well, and he was talking about how throughout his week he knows exactly where everything goes. So he uses, I think he uses followup.cc, but there's also tools like Boomerang, where if he gets an email to do a certain task, he knows what time of week he's going to do that. So, for example, for myself, if I get an email from my accountant and I see it on a Monday, I'm going to use Boomerang to have that email come back to me on Friday afternoon, because Friday afternoon I know that I'm going to be in that administrate mental state. So not only do I get to be more present in that incredibly important creative work that I'll be doing on that Monday, but then when Friday comes along, I'm not procrastinating on that item that comes through, because I know that this is the time that I do this type of stuff. And if I don't do it now, then I'm gonna have to wait a whole other week before I'm gonna get around to it.
Okay. And you've also worked in a startup which was sold to Google, right? Uh,
That's right. Yeah.
so, and you also have a chapter in your book, What I Learned About Productivity While Working at Google Calendar. That what did you learn?
Yeah. Well, this was I had written the blog post that was going to become Mind Management, Not Time Management. The blog post was called Mind Management, Not Time Management, and I got an email, and basically the behavioral scientist Dan Ariely was working on an app, and it was an app that was going to reinvent the calendar and basically use what Ariely has learned in all of his behavioral science research, and to sort of reinvent the calendar that way and have use machine learning and such. And so I was a design consultant for Timeful, and so I was tasked with and kind of looking at how I was using these mind management ideas and how can we kind of put that into an app. There was a lot of different stuff that we experimented with. The thing that ended up making it into Google Calendar after Google bought Timeful is this thing called goals. And the idea of goals is that you might say that you were going to say jog 3 times a week. Well, it would find using patterns is the best time for you to go jogging. How can you actually get that goal done? So I think that's one of the things that I learned was that not all time is created equal. And if you put something on your calendar, if you create these sort of formal ways of deciding how you're going to use your time and energy, then you get into this nice sort of perpetual motion machine process where you're not procrastinating on things and you're actually accomplishing the things that you want to accomplish.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so David, there's one question that I ask all my guests, and I'm going to ask
Mm.
the same to you. What, according to you, are the top 3 skills that one needs in order to be happy and successful, but schools are not teaching?
So first, I would say knowing how to attempt things without without being really attached to the outcome of them. I think this is a critical part of being creative is you have to try things that you don't know are going to work, and you have to be okay with them not working, and you have to try things that you don't know uh, you don't know even why you're doing them, and be okay with that and figure out how to make those into something. School teaches us how to uh, follow processes, follow instructions, and there are clear outcomes. You know that if you study for this test and you get the answers right, then you will get this good grade, and then supposedly then that will lead to getting some sort of job and some kind of success. I think that world is increasingly going away. So I
Mm.
think that's one of the main things. I think another thing that schools should teach that they don't is media literacy. Um, as Marshall McLuhan says, the medium is the message, and media forms our entire environment. So this is kind of goes outside the productivity conversation, but media creates this alternate reality
Yeah.
that people accept, And
True.
as Marshall McLuhan in Understanding Media, which I've summarized on my blog and on my podcast, he warns about media being a dangerous thing, that if people don't understand uh, what media can do, then they get sort of hypnotized by its power. Uh, and I mean, you can see how that works. And it's actually it's a it's a hard process to get through to people because it's like telling a fish, it's like describing water to a fish. So I think media literacy is something that people should learn about, and that should be taught in schools. The other one I think would be more emotional resilience, uh, understanding your own emotions, journaling, getting ideas of where you might fool yourself or look for scapegoats, um, and figuring out how to navigate that. I think that that is also really important. So to summarize that, that would be then the ability to try things that
Without outcome.
might not work,
Mhm.
media
Media
literacy, and emotional resilience.
resilience. Very good. I really like the second one because all our opinions today are from media. We don't know the rest of the world, but we have opinion about everything in the world, don't we?
Yeah, and also I think that's the main thing. And then also, you and I work in media, right? We're creating media right now, and our understanding of media and how it works and what the characteristics are of a piece of media and how that then shapes what that piece of media should be like is as important in being effective as understanding what a word means and how grammar should work, etc., because it is a means of communication. It is the means of communication in this world.
So true. Thank you very much, David. I really, really loved this conversation. Finally, tell us how people can reach you.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, it is an honor. And you can find more of me on Twitter at Kadavy, Instagram at Kadavy, TikTok, David Kadavy, YouTube, Kadavy. And I have a podcast, since you listen to podcasts, if you're listening to this, and that's called Love Your Work. And you can get it wherever it is that you're listening to this
So
or
I'm going to
watching
put,
this.
great, thanks, David. So I'm going to put all the links down here. And guys, if you really want to know stories about whatever we've spoken, then you need to check out the book. It's really different. It's not about having you a Excel sheet on how to track your productivity. No, it's something different. The mental models and the kind of things that we've spoken about. So do check it out. It's really interesting. And if you've got some value from this interview, then do not forget to subscribe to this channel. I will see you again next week. Until then, you take care and keep learning.